In it here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna bid on here now. Who bid $500,000 bid?
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now, with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on our show. We appreciate our good sponsor, Piper Auction and Realty, for sponsoring the Legacy of Agriculture. And today we're traveling back up to North Dakota, to Rame, North Dakota. And I've invited a good friend, fellow auctioneer and co-worker, Scott Bachmeier, to join us. Good morning, Scott. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks, Chris, for having me on the program. Appreciate it.
Well, we're at the end of January and we're pre-recording this show because you've got a very, very busy schedule. How's the weather and how's things looking for the upcoming spring calving season?
Well, the weather right now, currently it's going to be about 45 degrees today, but a week and a half ago it was 32 below with a wind chill at 64 below. And that was a record setting in my area. But for the next, I'd say in the next week here, we're looking at 40s and 50s. So the weather looks really good right now. A little bit tough on the cattle when it goes from extreme cold to as warm as it's going to be. But calving season, it's a tough one. You know, every spring, you seem to, for the last couple of years, it kind of all depends on Mother Nature giving us spring storms. And if she doesn't, it'll be great. If she does, it'll be challenging, just like the last couple springs. But so far, it looks good. You know, I mean, cows are healthy and got some feed put up last year, so it looks pretty nice.
Ah, that's great. Well, Scott, as you know, the Legacy of Agriculture is not necessarily about statistics or promotion. The Legacy of Agriculture is about telling people a story. And you've been a rancher at heart all of your career and all of your life. Tell us a little bit about your humble beginnings and what it was like growing up in Western North Dakota. Let's see, if I remember right, you're about 17 miles from the Montana border and you're about 45, 50 miles from the South Dakota border. So you're down in the very southwest corner of North Dakota. Yeah. There's a lot more cows than there are people.
And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, so I originally grew up by a little town called Raleigh, and outside of Raleigh Shields area. It's by the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. And I grew up there, farm, ranch, a very small farm, a lot of cows, and we had dairy cows. So twice a day before I went to school and when I got home from school, we had to milk cows. And when got to be a senior in school, and you're going to get a kick out of this, senior in high school, there's a neighbor of ours that wanted to retire. And he approached me and asked me if I wanted to stay around the area. And I said, absolutely. And he said he wanted $96 an acre for his property. And that included the buildings and an updated milk barn. And we went to the bank and my dad and the banker sat there and we could not make it work and pencil it out for $96 an acre.
For $96.
$96. So thus started my radio career. I ended up going to college in Minot, North Dakota, in Minot State, and got a broadcasting degree, which got me into radio in that area. My dad got injured, so I went back to the farm and ranch for a while and took over things there until he got a little bit better. And then once he got better, it was such a small operation, there wasn't enough for two families. So I ended up down in the southwestern corner of the state here, and I have never looked back, man. It's just been a beautiful ride, and met my beautiful bride here, and we're on her generational family's ranch. Been here since in the late 1800s when they moved out here and started it, and been kind of carrying on this legacy out this way. So that's how I ended up in the Badlands of North Dakota.
3 generations ago, how in the world did they wind up in North Dakota?
This is actually we're the 5th generation here.
Fifth generation.
Yeah, on this ranch right here, with being married through my wife. Yeah. And it's kind of an interesting story because we found out the gentleman who there was 2 brothers, excuse me, 2 brothers that actually came out to the Badlands because they heard that the grass was so good in the Badlands in North Dakota. And they're true. The grass out here raises a heck of a critter. There's no doubt about it. And granted, during drought years, there's not a lot of grass, which is why they had such big ranches back then. It doesn't take long for the grass to rejuvenate, though, compared to maybe some other areas that have drought. This is a kind of some remarkable area. Those two brothers moved out this way, and it was too rough for one of the brothers, and he moved back. And he moved back to the same place that I grew up on. And we found this story. So where I grew up by Raleigh is where one of the brothers went back that way and started his own place. And the other brother stayed out here. I grew up on one, and I married the gal that the other brother started over here. So it's kind of a full circle story. It's kind of a unique I enjoy the rough country, and I guess my other brothers, they can sit back in the less rough country, just like my wife's great-great-grandpa did.
You talk about the grasslands of North Dakota. That's always been intriguing to me. And that's and Andy Murnack, our coworker and fellow auctioneer, we talked a little bit about we've talked a lot about the Murnack Ranch and the Herefords and their upcoming bull sale and cattle sale that they're having. But the grass in North Dakota is different, and Medora has a deep, rich history about the grasses in North Dakota and why Medora is where it's at.
Absolutely. The Marquis de Moore, the Chateau de Moore still stands to this day up in Medora. He was one of the largest cattle ranchers probably in the entire state in the upper Midwest or the Northern Plains back in the day when Teddy Roosevelt moved out from New York just to get away from the city life a little bit here. And of course, those two didn't see eye to eye. They didn't get along at all, but he stuck it out here. The Mr. DeMoore stuck it out in this country. And it's a funny thing. According to legend, there is a set of china. We're in the original homestead. There was a sod house, and then the next generation, and this house was built in 1909 or something like that, is where I'm actually sitting at right now. This used to be an open porch. We enclosed it to make the radio studio. And there's supposed to be a set of china that was given from Teddy Roosevelt to my wife's great-grandpa or grandmother.
Is that right?
Now, back in the day, everybody had at least one set of china, right?
Right.
Well, now we have two sets of china sitting in this old cabinet, and we don't know which one was the one that Teddy Roosevelt gave to her great-grandmother. We have no idea, so we keep both of them.
Right.
We say
well,
both
you can't
of them.
miss.
Yeah. But yeah, that's back in the open range, and a lot of that has to do like our brand. Our brand is the reverse C cross or lazy C cross is what my father-in-law still uses. I use the reverse C cross in our cattle. And the lazy C cross, the C was for Charlie Bam, who was one of the originals out here in homesteading, and Teddy Roosevelt had the Maltese cross. And every cow in this area got if it was between Roosevelt's cattle and my wife's great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, I guess you could say, what happened was everything got the cross and half of them got the lazy C on top of the cross. That's how our brand became to be, was the lazy C cross on the ranch here.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. Hey, we're coming down to the end of our first segment. Scott Bachmeier from southwestern North Dakota is my guest here today. We're coming down to the end of our first segment. We'd like to give thanks to our sponsor, Pifer Auction and Realty, for complete listing of our 2024 spring auctions. Go to pifers.com or call us at 605-836-2277. Nobody does it better.
This is Kyle, equipment sales representative with Pifer's Auction and Realty. Pifer's is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
Hey folks, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture, and my good friend and coworker Scott Bachmeier, fellow auctioneer, is joining me remotely here on the show this morning. Again, Scott, thank you for joining us. We had an very interesting first segment, Scott. We got talking about the grasslands of North Dakota and the type of grass that the cattle, a little different type of grass that raises a little different type of cattle. Tell me why the native grasses of North Dakota produces a different grade of cattle.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely not a biologist by any means here, Chris, but as a cattle person, we have cool season grasses and we have warm season grasses. And it's vitally important that you know which grass you have in different pastures and rotating the cattle to utilize it for the best part. I always tell everybody that they say you're into running cattle. Your job is to raise cattle. My job is to raise grass. The byproduct of what I do by raising grass are the cattle. So by utilizing the pastures correctly, not overusing them, and you can't underuse them either, you can raise one heck of a cow. There's a lot of protein in this grass, and even if it dries out middle of July, late summer, it still packs one heck of a punch so the calves can gain some good pounds. But the grasslands are, we just call it home, I guess. And it's funny always hearing somebody say the grasslands of North Dakota, because we just live in it, so we don't ever refer to it as that so much, but we just call it home. When you're raising these cattle out here, if it's important to have the hooves on this type of grassland because they're the ones that regenerate. They're the ones that spread the seeds for the next grass to grow. It's important to maintain the weeds out of it because in this area, if you let weeds take over just a little bit, they will take over most everything. So you got to be very vigilant on taking care of that too. And that's a whole new kind of a problem because the Badlands are not an easy place to get around. So a lot of this is done with either a four-wheeler or a backpack on your back or getting in there with a horse in order to make sure you get in and take care of those weeds and certain issues.
I've noted with a lot of interest on your Facebook page that a lot of the pictures that you take or the selfies that you take is right between the ears of your horse as you're sitting on the saddle. And if you go to Scott Bachmeier's Facebook page, and if he's got it posted to the public, you're going to see some of the most beautiful scenery that you'll ever see in your life, right from the saddle of his horse. So that's a great thing. In our earlier segment, we talked about Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt had a absolutely love and passion for North Dakota, for the upper Midwest. Tell us a little bit about that. You talked about him giving your family a set of china as a gift. Explain Teddy Roosevelt and the history with your part of the country.
Well, he moved out here. I think he spent a whopping 18 months. The winter was not friendly for Teddy Roosevelt. He didn't really enjoy that as much, but he fell in love with the country. He fell in love with the people, except for, of course, the Moors that he had a little issue with, which that's what happens when you raise cattle. And but yeah, he moved out, and I think he needed to do it for his health reasons. I don't think he was kind of his history says he was kind of a sickly kid in New York, and he moved out here for a little bit of fresh air. And the Badlands in North Dakota will solve that. I mean, if you want to just take a deep breath and see what clean, fresh air smells like, and have a beautiful view, that's definitely what we have out this way. And he spent 18 months. He raised cattle, and then he started getting into the politics side of things. He also kept his ranch here, and he had some people running it. Granted, the neighbor that was closest to me is a very non-politically correct name, but it is in the history books as that name, and I'm not going to say it on air here. I can text it to. It's that bad. So but that's how people spoke back then. That's how they referred to people, and we'll just call him Tyler was his last name. And they still have the homestead. You can still see the foundation where that was to this day, just north of the ranch up here. And And so, yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing, you know. And of course, he went on to go into some wars and be president, and he started the actual conservation side of things, is what he's famous for. And Teddy Roosevelt Park wouldn't be here to this day if it wouldn't be for Theodore Roosevelt himself.
Well, not only that, if you go back and read the history books about Teddy Roosevelt, is he was the conservation president, best one we've ever had, and a lot of our national parks and what we have is a result of Teddy Roosevelt.
It is. And that's kind of a sore subject sometimes in this area, Chris, because there were some areas that once he did get into his presidency that he started turning into a national park, and he took land away from some of the ranchers that he was neighboring with back when he was in North Dakota.
Right.
So it is a touchy subject in this area, but on a national basis, yeah, conservation, he is the father of conservation. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, he loved the Midwest. He loved coming from the East Coast out in the Midwest for a lot of reasons. One of the things that people don't know about the native grasses of North Dakota, and I lived in North Dakota for 5 years. I grew up on a potato farm out west and moved into North Dakota in the early 2000s. And one of the pieces of history of the Dakotas and eastern Montana is the biggest fear that they had was not necessarily because of the tough, hard, cold winters, but it was fire in the fall.
Oh boy, yeah.
The natives were absolutely scared to death as they moved across the plains. That was back in the days when there was a lot of buffalo, there was a lot of wildlife. They were scared to death because once a grass fire started, for whatever reason, whether it was a spark or a hoof on a steel shoe on a horse starting a grass fire. Once that grass fire started, and there's always a wind blowing, it seems like in the upper Midwest, they had no way of stopping fires other than rain or lightning. Yeah. Lightning was a great, they were very much afraid of the lightning and lightning starting grass fires and not being able to stop them. And the animals and the natives or the farmsteads or whoever oftentimes couldn't get out of the path of the fire, and was devastating to those people.
Absolutely. We're still in that. Every year we're worried about fires. And this ranch had a bad one in 1976. A couple of folks were out grouse hunting, and they started a fire with their vehicles, and that was on the way south portion of the ranch, and the wind was out of the south and it moved straight north, and it was a very devastating fire. And you can still see the remnants, especially in our deep draws, our pine trees, the cedar trees, and we have one portion of our pasture we call the winter pasture that half of the trees are all missing out of that right now. And we, as you know, people don't think North Dakota and trees go together, but here in this portion of the Badlands where we live, there's quite a few smaller forests out here, and it just devastated every one of them. And that's probably a good reason why a lot of the Native Americans, they would actually move those buffalo around to the different grasses. They knew which grasses those buffalo did better on, and that's why everybody says they follow the buffalo, but if you read some of the Native American history, they actually herded the buffalo to certain areas of the Dakota Territory for better grasses in the springtime and better ones in the fall time.
They did that out of necessity.
Absolutely.
They did that to stay alive and to grow their tribes and to have clothing and food. And so I'd never heard that before, Scott, that they herded the buffalo from time to time more than they just followed them around.
Yeah, so, and this comes from growing up by the reservation. So I went to a schooling in my early years on the reservation, and I read a lot of the Native American, their version of the history books and our version of history books growing up. So I had both sides of that story. So it's kind of an interesting thing, whether it's true or not. I wasn't around at that time, but that's one of the reasons why I think that to this day the grasses need to be rotated, and the Dakota Territory, what a beautiful place to live.
Thank you, Scott. We're coming down to the end of our second segment. Shout out to our sponsor, Pfeiffer Auction Realty. For more information about our 2024 spring auctions coming up, go to Pfeiffers.com. Folks, we'll be right back.
This is Jasmine with Pfeiffer's Auction and Realty. We have a great lineup of machinery and farm sales this spring. Many of them already have listings available on our website. If you're looking to buy land or machinery, go to www.pfeiffers.com to see a complete catalog of our auctions. It's updated daily, so make sure to check back in with us and find the perfect lot for you. When it comes to auctions, nobody does it better.
Folks, this is Chris Bair, your host on the Legacy of Agriculture. My good friend and coworker Scott Bachmeier is up in Rame, North Dakota.
There you go.
And I got it right, didn't I?
Yep.
And he's joining us via video, and we appreciate Scott taking time out of his very, very busy schedule. Number one, Scott, you're a rancher. Okay.
Correct.
And because we're talking about history here, not only are you a rancher, tell us about your broadcasting and your presence on the radio station in your part of the world, and kind of what you're doing with technology and your radio.
Okay. Yeah. So like I said, in the very first segment of the program, ended up going to college instead of buying land for $96 an acre, which is probably worth $4,000 an acre in that same place right now. But anyway, started the radio career when I moved down to the Bowman area. I was doing an afternoon program, and during the morning hours, I would help local farmers and ranchers as a day helper, and then come in the afternoon and do my radio program. And that moved into morning show program and taking more responsibilities. And as that kind of grew and still stayed with agriculture, helping, whether it was I was working in a welding shop, because as anybody in radio knows to this day, it does not pay very well. So you need an alternate job.
Sure.
And I just had that radio bug and kept it going, and what happened here over the years is there was a gentleman out of Pierre, South Dakota, his name was Tony Dean, and his show was Dakota Backroads, and I'm sure there's plenty of listeners out here. His show was on many, many stations, and when he passed away, I saw an opportunity to attempt to do my version of what he used to do and keep this going. And that's where Dakota Prairie Outdoors, that's my outdoor radio program, broadcast on 20 plus stations throughout North and South Dakota. A big thanks to those guys for continuing on with me. And it kind of grew from there. And then I also do a farm and ranch reports for iHeartMedia stations through the upper Midwest. And I voice track a morning show for old country radio station out of Montana, and I do it all right here from the ranch. And that cannot be done without good quality internet from my rural internet provider and reliable electricity. And a lot of people overlook those two things. And during the COVID years, during the big storms that we had the last couple of springs during calving, that's what allows me to do my program from a little piece of heaven out here in the Badlands.
Well, not only are you a full-time rancher and you've got your radio show, a very, very successful radio program, but you're an auctioneer on top of that.
Yeah.
How do you fit all that in?
Well, the auctioneering came out of necessity, Chris, because I do a lot of emceeing for events, and I try to help different fundraisers. And it never failed. Every single fundraiser, somebody would come up and say, "Can you auction this off?" And I'd be like, "No, I can't, but I'll try." And of course, it didn't sound worth anything. And finally, my wife looked at me and says, "You know what you should do is go to auctioneer school." I said, "I know, but it's in February, and there's like 2-3 weeks that you're going to have to feed cows." She said, "Do it. I'll take care of it." And so, yeah, I don't know, it's been 7-8 years ago or something. I went to auctioneer school, and of course, Andy Murdoch encouraged me to go as well. And that's been great. I fit it in because on my place, my ranch is very self-sustaining. If the weather's nice, as it has been this winter, it's the cattle are out grazing on the winter grass right now, and they're doing just awesome. The only thing that I got to feed in the mornings right now are I've moved my bred heifers in closer to home because they're going to start calving at the end of February, and I just want to keep them a little bit closer so I don't have to go out in the Badlands and try to dig them out. I have them in I call it an AI pasture, just a smaller pasture that I move them into, kind of a rotation. and keep them close to home. As it gets closer to calving season, I do slow down on what auctions I do and what I help with, but right now it's bull sale season, and today I have a sale, tomorrow I have a sale, and what I do is feed up for 3-4 days for my bred heifers. I bale graze, which is a beautiful way of grazing out here in the Badlands. I put it on ground that's marginal and set bales out there, and that what was marginal ground turns into some pretty decent grass in the next couple of years.
I know that when I went to auction school clear back in the early 90s, I went to the Western School of Auctioneering in Billings. The one thing that they said when you go to auctioneer school is do not quit your day job.
Yeah.
you'll starve to death. And so, you know what I did? I came home and quit my day job and went into the auction business because I have a tendency not to listen, and so, yeah, don't ever quit your day job. But you've done an absolutely an amazing job, Scott. I've had the opportunity to listen to you. You've come down to our Worthing facility at Piper, south of Sioux Falls, and have helped us. And you do a phenomenal job and have a very interesting story to tell. So tell me how we've just got a couple of minutes at the end of this segment, and you've mentioned your wife a couple of times. In all the years that I've been traveling and selling auctions at ranches and farmsteads, oftentimes the silent partner that is the glue that holds everything together is the wife.
Absolutely. And if you don't believe that, you're lying to yourself.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing the amount of work that the wife does that the husband always gets credit for.
And that includes like the meal at branding. I have nothing to do with that. And I tell everybody, don't look at me. You go up to that young lady and you thank her. That had nothing to do with me at all.
Yeah, they're an amazing integral part of any farming and ranching operation. Never been on a farm where a wife wasn't an important part of the operation, for sure.
Absolutely.
Scott, tell me a little bit more about your cattle operation. You're just and we've got just a little bit over a minute in this segment.
Okay. Well, instead of that, Chris, if I may interject, let's save that for the next one. But
okay.
A lot of people don't know. I went to Western School of Auctioneering Billings as well, is where I went. And
nice.
You were there years before me. And I don't know if you remember your class number or not, but the thing about, if people don't know this, in the Western School of Auctioneering, you start by auctioneering a rake.
That's correct.
You and I guarantee, have sold that same rake, and that was the same one that the originator started way back in the 40s in that school. And everybody to this day has to sell and start out selling one item, and that is a rake, just a typical garden rake. So it's kind of cool that you got to sell it in the 90s, and I got to sell it about 10 years ago.
And I was as afraid of that rake as I was of the microphone when I actually had to sell for the microphone. I still have a hard time getting used to microphones after all of these years. But anyways, hey, folks, we're coming down to the end of our third segment. Appreciate our sponsor, good sponsor, Piper Auction and Realty. Pifers.com is the website you'll want to go to get our 2024 spring auction schedule. We'll be right back in the fourth segment.
This is Kyle, equipment sales representative with Pifers Auction and Realty. Pifers is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
Hey folks, it's Chris Bair, your host of The Legacy of Agriculture, and my good friend Scott Bachmeier from southwestern North Dakota is joining us this morning. In our last segment number 3, Scott, we were talking about the Western School of Auctioneering. We both went to the same auction school, talking about the rake. You had a unique and interesting experience selling that rake. And if you didn't get the third segment, I want to tell our listeners that this rake was what you had to sell at the Western School of Auctioneering in Billings, and everybody had to sell that rake over and over and over again. So tell me about your experience there with that.
Yeah. So this rake, it's the first thing, whether you're a seasoned auctioneer or brand new like I was going in here, had no idea how to auction at all. you had to sell this rake. That was your first thing you got to sell. And of course, the very first day I show up, and Kyle Shobe, he's the 2010 livestock auctioneer world champion, comes in with his buckle and his ring, and he looks down, and him and I have done a few fundraisers before where I was the MC and he was the auctioneer. And he looked and he's like, hey, Bachmeier, it's about time you come into auctioneer school. And he gets up there and he grabs this rake and he just starts chanting away like a world champion would. And he's looking for people to take bids. So it's like, okay. So I start bidding and he's doing his chant and he's going back and forth. And he sells it to me. He said, sold. And I had no idea what that meant. But when he says sold, that means I had to go up and sell this rake following the 2010 World Livestock Auctioneer Champion. And you want to talk about embarrassing, and it really humbles you going to auctioneer school, because you think you know how to count until you go to auctioneer school, and you have no clue how to count until they teach you how to do it again.
Not very many people understand in being an auctioneer. Not only do you have to count in singles, dimes, nickels, dimes, quarters, and dollars, but you've got to learn it forward and backwards.
And you got to learn 2.5s, and
yeah, that's exactly right. So to be the art of becoming an auctioneer, the school that you go, the schools that are available to go to, that's just the very beginning. You've got the crucible is behind the microphone and a bunch of grumpy old farmers or ranchers, and you're trying to sell them stuff that they don't want. That's where you learn how to be an auctioneer. Is that right, Scott?
Well, you can cut your teeth on all the practice that you do in the school. It's nothing like the first time you get in front of somebody in an auction sale. And Andy Murdoch put me up the very first time. I got to sell scrap metal, and tires and scrap metal at the end of the sale. And there's usually who's left, like two people, and that's the two people that are scrap metal guys, and they know what they're going to pay, and they're not going to dime over. So it's kind of fun. I still enjoy it.
And they're not merciful to the auctioneer either. They're going to beat him to death if they get the chance. Yeah, it's very interesting to be on the opposite side of the microphone from the crowd and learn and have to do that. And Andy is famous for you think you're an auctioneer and you think you're a good auctioneer. And I know that Andy, the first time I sold, he shocked me. He invited me up at the topper and he says, go to selling. And then he took the microphone away from me. And later on, I don't know if Andy remembers this or not, he says, I couldn't stand to listen to you anymore. Go down and be a ringman and work on the trailer. So that's what I did. I will never claim that I'm a great auctioneer, but I have learned how to do it, and I've sold my fair share over the years. So it's a great occupation. I've absolutely loved the auction business over the years, because you get to meet so many good people I call it a non-confrontational situation, and you get to provide a service to most farmers and ranchers that nobody else gets to, and you get to know them on a very intimate level, and it's a great career to be in. So,
well, you talk about meeting people, Chris. The last time I was down in Sioux Falls and helped you out, we had that land auction that we helped, and a young lady, and she wanted to get in and start farming on a small business and sell organic eggs and chickens and ducks. And she wanted that little chunk of land so she could expand her little farm, and she didn't get it, and she was just heartbroken.
Yep.
And to this day, she still keeps in contact. She just messaged me. They found a chunk of land, and she's so excited that she can expand and become a little bit bigger on the agricultural side. Even if it's a small side, that's how much it means that what we did, helping her try to get it, even though she didn't, she still keeps in contact, because it was an important and an emotional day for some people when they buy their first property, or maybe their 15th property.
That really is the truth, Scott. It's a blessing from God to be able to be in the auction industry and to be able to rub shoulders with people. And when you take into the last 15 years, you have more online auctions. It seems to be really the trend. And we as an auction company have chose to continue to incorporate the technology of online and simulcast auctions, but continue to pursue the live auctions. It's really in the live auctions where you really get to know to know
Yeah.
the people that you're working for and that you're selling for, and to learn their histories, it's a blessing, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And you have to embrace the technology. And I think it's still important to have that live, because there's people that still want to kick the tires and look at equipment, and they might not officially make their mind up until you have a ringman walk up there and talk to you a little bit about it. And the online is so nice, because you might be super busy, you might be in the field, and with today's technology, with auto steer, they can be online bidding at the same time they're getting their crops put in, or like I did that
Harvest.
one, or harvest, or even moving cows. I mean, we did it in the fall auction here. We were moving the neighbors' cows, and I was bidding on my phone on top of the hill where I had service in the saddle. So I mean, as long as a person has service to do that, I think it's a great thing. But the good balance between online and live auction, I think you have to have that necessity on both sides, because I love talking to people. I like shaking hands, and sometimes you can't do that over the internet.
And that really is true. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, Scott.
Sure.
But the live auction, I think the bottom line with the live auction is and I will always be a fan of online, but with the live auction, we can create an environment that you can't get anywhere else. If you go into one of our arenas where we're selling a live auction, and you've got good auctioneers and you've got good ringmen, machinery brings more money. It allows that auctioneer to look the buyer in the eyes and say, sir, you know what? Here's a 4555 that's only got 4,500 actual hours. And that was a tractor that was built 30 years ago, and be able to say, figure the hours against the number of years, and you're going to realize how little this tractor was used, and just take a look at it again. And almost every single time, a good live auctioneer will get more money. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it also, being face to face, you can read people's expressions. You can read people both ways.
That's right.
That buyer's looking at the auctioneer in their eyes, or looking at that ringman in their eyes, putting trust in you because you are face to face, and that's how you make a square, honest deal.
That's exactly right. Well, unfortunately, folks, we're at the end of this radio show. Thank you again, Scott, for joining us. I know you're a busy man and you've got to get off to a bull sale. Speaking of live auctions, if you want a good list of our upcoming land and machinery auction for the spring of 2024, you'll want to go to pifers.com. That's PIFERS.com. Call us 605-836-2277. Nobody, absolutely nobody does it better than Pifers.
$500,000 bid.
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pifers Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pifers at 605-836-2277.